Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining here today. I'm going to talk about build system today. So throughout this talk, the main focus is going to be the answer the question and help you to answer the question. Like, do you need an alternative build system? Okay, let's dive in. Let's first a little bit about myself. My name is Madushan. I currently work at Grab. I'm happy to connect with you, anyone. So the Twitter handle and the LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Super happy to chat about anything. So today's agenda, 4 things. First, the little bit of discussion about how to decide do you need an alternative build system or not. Second, to little bit of exploration about top available alternatives. Alternatives by mean alternative build systems. Third, Xcode and Bazel. Bazel is one of the alternative build systems that is quite famous as an alternative to the Xcode. Finally, if Bazel is for you, 2 questions: how to migrate from Xcode to Bazel, and then how Xcode and Bazel can work together in harmony. So I'm pretty sure at this point of time, some of these, if you haven't even considered about the alternative build system, this question might not very ticking. But bear with me, let's go into the details and the questions while we go along. So back to the question, do you need an alternative build system? So if someone asked me this question, I would have follow-up questions because this question is not very well defined, right? Intentionally so. So first question, alternative to what, right? So alternative to our a beloved tool, Xcode. I'm pretty sure everyone here has used Xcode at least once in your day-to-day life, right? I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with this tool. So this little bit of history about this tool. So first version came up in 2003. Little bit of question, anyone here born after 2003? Okay, we had a couple of folks. So Xcode, the first version is older than you guys. Second, the Xcode first version is based on actually the tool called Project Builder. The Project Builder was the IDE originally developed by Next. So if you don't know what Next is the company that Steve Jobs started after the famous exit from Apple. So they released the first version of the Project Builder in 1992. So who has born after 1992? Anyone, if anyone? Okay, great. So you get the idea. This tool is pretty old. The origin of this tool is kind of goes way back to the original days of Apple, right? So and also you can still see this kind of the kind of residues of this first version, because if you remember the file extension of this Xcode proj file, inside the Xcode project there is a file called project.pbxproj. This pbx comes from this project builder. The PB is the project builder. X is, I don't know where it's coming from. It's something iPhone 10, iPhone X. That's maybe something like that. I don't know exactly. Okay. Let's kind of try to understand what Xcode is. So Xcode is an application that consists of many pieces. Primarily here, it is an IDE, and then it has a build system in it, and then it has compilers, linkers, and a bunch of other tools inside it, right? So our focus here is the build system today, but we might be talking about other components as well, here and there. Okay, so let's kind of try to untangle what the build system is, right? So this is one of the analogy I pretty much like to bring up all the time to explain a build system. Imagine you are building a complex Lego structure. So the way you do it, there is a kind of a certain way to put pieces together. So, I mean, in some cases there are certain order to follow. In some cases that you can do things in parallel, but end of the day, the output has to be exactly the same if you want to get it right. So the build system is doing something like that. It has many tasks to perform. These tasks include compiling source code, or maybe building an interface builder file, or linking all the binaries together at the end, and then finally it needs to produce the application that we want to run. So the build system has like hundreds of these different tasks, and then it knows how to orchestrate them in a certain order to give the output that we want. And two special mentions. So these are like there is a lower level build system called LL-build. So Xcode has a build system, and then the Xcode use a lower level build system called LL-build. And LL-build is kind of specialized for it's game primarily for the Swift. So this is a Swift build system primarily, but there are some Objective-C parts as well. But there's a new version called LL-build 2. So Apple introduced this as an experiment, but it is not moving very well. Like if you check the commit history of this LL-build 2, it's receiving like very infrequent commits. So I'm not honestly sure that where it is going, but I'll explain like what's LL-build 2 is about. There are like the three things here, like so three primary differences between LL-build 1 and LL-build 2. So first, LL-build 2 is a functional build system. What does that mean? So the functional build system means that it acts as a functional program. So it guarantees you for a given output, it produces a certain output, and then these outputs can be inputs to the next action. So if the build system is chain of actions, and then if each of these actions guarantee you certain inputs can produce a certain output, it's a kind of a functional build system. It is important concept for this talk. I'll explain why a little bit later. And then it has a phased execution. So means there are two primary phases. One is evaluation phase, and then the execution phase. Evaluation phase means evaluate the entire build graph and understand what it needs to do, and then execute it. So there are two phases. Finally, LL-build 2 is a content addressable storage, so which means like any action produce certain output, and then you can generate a hash for that output, and then you can always find this output based on that hash. So this is also a very important characteristic of it. Okay, enough of bit of in-depth detail. Let's go back to the question. Do you need an alternative build system to Xcode build system? Right? So I'm kind of redefining the question here. The answer is kind of boring answer. It depends, right? So it depends on the problems, right? So because we need to define the problems, because some of these problems might not applicable to everyone. So you need to. So if I'm here to help you to make a decision, and then probably I would like to go through the problem together with you guys. The top problem, this is a bit of like, there's a bit of taboo around this statement. Like, it doesn't work at scale. You might have heard some people talk, maybe it's a problem for you as well. So people say Xcode doesn't work at scale, at my scale. So what does it mean? Right, first, so let's take about kind of like a code-based growth story. Like, so this is quite a little bit of similar to the graph story. So over the years, your code base grows, and then you hit a point like your code base has, your application code base cross 2 million lines of code, 3 million lines of code for your entire app. So at that point of time, Xcode gives you certain problems. I'll go through certain problems like a little bit later, but I want to highlight that like at certain scale, you might start seeing these problems, right? So there's another example, like, so what the scale means is like, so your daily contributors rate is growing, and at some point you hit, there is kind of 150 contributors for the exact same app for any given day, right? Roughly, on average 150 contributors contributing to the same app. So that will give you increasing number of commits per day. Like you might hit 80, 150, 200 commits per day for a given app. So this scale is a different scale. So like inside Apple, I mean, I don't know exactly like how they deal with it. I mean, I know some teams at Apple, they use Bazel. Not the apps team. I don't know about the apps team, but there are some kind of a cloud tools team. They use Bazel to kind of get around these problems. But maybe the apps teams, how they deal with this problem is because they might have access to kind of like the best machine you can find. Mac Pro, the latest, most beefed up version, might able to help you. But it's not the story for everyone, understandably, right? So, and let's kind of try to understand what problems we see at scale. Number one, I'm pretty sure like everyone knows what this file is about. This Xcode project files, this is very old file format that, as I described earlier. So this file, so if you have a project that receives 150, 200 commits per day, and then if you frequently hit merge conflicts to this file, it's pretty hard to resolve. Like it's because this file is kind of unreadable, and then it gives you a bit of nightmare to kind of resolve merge conflicts, which is a bit of a problem. Some people have kind of get around this problem by using to kind of declarative project generations. You might have seen that you can define the Xcode project using YML file format, and then you generate, and you don't commit the Xcode project file into your Git repo. You only commit those YML specifications. That kind of works. That works for some of the problems, but not for all. Okay, and this is how the Xcode, the build description looks like usually. So you usually add source files to your targets, source files to your frameworks, apps, and then it reflects in a file format like this. This is pretty much unreadable. No one knows what this is about. It's pretty hard to kind of resolve conflicts in that. I mean, there are tools that some people have built to help with this problem, but still nothing is kind of working perfectly. Next problem is the build time. So if you have a code base which is crossing 3 million lines of code, your build times becomes a problem. Like you might spend a lot of time building the app, especially when you combine 3 million lines of code project with 150 commits, 200 commits per day. What happens is you make a change, and then within few hours, you rebase, your entire build graph become invalidated. So your incremental build become almost a clean build, right? So this is another problem at scale. Next, the cost of CI/CD infra is becoming higher, because when you have to build a large project and when you have like very large set, the amount of CI hours needed to support this is very high. You need a lot of hardware power to power that. So at Grab, for example, we have 250, around 250 Mac Minis to support our CI/CD needs. So you need that kind of scale to kind of when you grow. And the next thing is build reproducibility. I'm pretty sure you have heard like this problem that if you have a team that like 3-4 people working on the same project, you might have heard like, okay, this works on my machine, exact same commit, but doesn't work on others' machine. So you have to do a clean build. Anyone here like never had to do a clean build with Xcode ever? Before? I guess no? Yeah, okay. So I assume that everyone has done a clean build at least once in their lifetime. So that's a problem, right? Okay, so going back to the problem again, do you need an alternative build system to Xcode build? So we define the problems. Now you understand the problem. So I'm asking you the question again, right? And we need more information, right? So we need, like, actually, if you need an alternative build system or not, depends on the solution actually solves the problem. If the solution doesn't solve the problem, then yeah, what's the point, right? So let's look at the solutions available, okay? So number one, Bazel, right? So Bazel is the build system that introduced by, so this is the Google had a build system that they use for their internal builds. So famously, I'm not sure like if you have heard that the Google has a code base, a single repository which has multi-billion lines of code. Like almost all the Google software is in a single repository. And then they use the build system called Blaze to build it. And then they open source a version of that which is called Bazel, right? So that's how Bazel came in, open source in 2015. It is a scalable build system. It can, because if it can support multi-billion lines of code project, so it has good characteristic that can scale to very large projects. And it is polyglot, which means that it's a build system that supports many languages, Python, Swift, Java, Kotlin, you name it. It's extensible. You can write, if there's a new programming language comes tomorrow, you can write a build rules that can support it, and the core stays the same. So it is extensible to any languages, right? Second one is called Buck. This is the story behind Buck is some folks at Google went to Meta, Facebook at the time, they missed the build system, and then they built the exact same thing from the scratch. So this became Buck, right? Open source, it is also open source, but compared to the Bazel, this has a less diff between the internal version and the open source version. So the Bazel has a little bit of like a huge difference sometimes because the Google is not actively contributing back because they move fast internally. But it's still when it comes to Bazel, external contributions are extremely high. So still, Bazel is kind of widely used compared to Buck. And the Buck, there is a new version of Buck which has very good characteristics and the features, which was released in 2023, quite recently, which is very powerful. But it's still that it seems the Bazel also catching up with some of the features that the Buck 2 has. But this is quite interesting development. It's good to have the competition. So for us, right? It's also multi-language. Okay, let's do a bit of evaluation. So, I mean, I'm not going to put our own calculations here, but I'm just putting this as a framework. Like if you guys go into a scale or about to go into a scale that you might need an alternative build system, probably this might be one of like a simpler framework to evaluate through 4 criteria. So one is like scalability. So we have 3 candidates. So you could evaluate scalability and the development velocity and the experience, like using them. Third one, confidence and the long-term support and investment. I'll double down this, highlight the thing a little bit more. A fourth one, migration and maintenance cost, because this doesn't come at free. There is a migration cost, there's a maintenance cost you have to bear with. So let me highlight this long-term support and investment, because this is pretty important thing that I find like a lot of engineers make mistakes. So when making these kind of decisions, so this is what I'm talking about. Like let me take a little bit of different example. So this question I think I have seen this in even the last iOS Dev Scout. There was a panel, and then one of the question was about using cross-platform frameworks, React Native or Flutter, whatever, right? So one common mistake I'm seeing like across the board that engineers are making. So when evaluating to use such a tool, it is applicable to using the Bazel or not. I think we should consider the amount of investment going into like each project. Like for example, let's say you are evaluating a cross-platform framework, right? Flutter, for example. So let's say you are making a decision for next 5 years. You're making a decision impacting 5 years a timeline. So now, like, consider, one thing you can consider is what is the status today. So the current status quo. This is everyone does. But most people don't do is like try to forecast 5 years what's going to happen. Like what I mean by that is take UI kit, Swift UI for example. Apple is putting like an incredible amount of money investment into these tools, and then like you fast forward 5 years, and then these are like a great engineers, kind of very talented people putting so much effort, and then it is instrumental to Apple's success. So you can kind of have very good confidence that Apple is going to continue to invest in that, and it's going to improve over the 5 years. Take on the other side the Compose, the Android thing. Google has two things, right? So Flutter is also from Google, Compose is also from Google, and try to gauge based on your best knowledge amount of investment going into Compose versus the amount of investment going into Flutter. Right? So then you can try to forecast 5 years what's going to happen. So what I'm trying to highlight here is like, so when making the decision, is that today's status quo is one thing, but if you're making a decision for the long term, try to forecast based on amount of investment going into each tool, which will tell you some story that like you might ignore otherwise. I hope you got the message. Okay, let's move on. So when you're evaluating, I think this is something like we did. So to gauge like, okay, because this was going to be a huge investment, and then like when is going to be the ROI going to hit, we did some like rough, of course you cannot do perfect maths here, but try to do some ROI calculations like when it's going to pay out, worst case, best case. Yeah, this is just an example. I mean, this is going to be different for everyone. Okay, so we are coming to the bit of comparison Xcode versus Bazel. I mentioned about the build description before. So this is how the build description is going to be different between Bazel and Xcode. So on the left side, you have how the Xcode build descriptions look like. In the Bazel, it is very readable, very simple way to describe your entire project. So it is very descriptive build description. So that's a positive thing about Bazel. And also like the hermeticity is one thing that the Bazel guarantee, like which means like if you and your friend build on the same commit, there is a guarantee that if it works on your machine, and then it's going to be work on your friend's machine if you configure things correctly, because if the inputs are the same, output is guaranteed to be the same, right? And then like, so one of the kind of most important advantage of Bazel is the remote build cache and the execution. So this diagram, like I'm trying to highlight like that how it's going to play out in the larger team. Like let's say you have a local build, and then you submit a merge request, which is run some CI workload on your CI infrastructure, which can actually distribute the build across multiple machines. So this is very important. Xcode cannot do it today. So imagine you have like 4 million lines of code, very big project. You want to build it across multiple machines. You can't do it with Xcode today. Xcode has to be built on a single machine. It cannot extend beyond one machine. So, but with Bazel you can, if you want. And another thing is like it can, so once the CI is run, the build cache can be saved and stored somewhere, and then when your friend pull your commit, he can reuse the cache that was generated, so he doesn't have to build again. So this is how what it makes Google kind of build a 7 billion, not 7 billion, multi-billion lines of repo using Bazel. The build cache and the remote execution is kind of play a key role there. Without that, I don't think they're able to do it. So migration to Bazel, like, okay, if the answer is yes for anyone, so what it takes to migrate. I mean, I'm not going to go into like much details, we don't have time, but I'm going to give you like kind of bit of overview to how to make a decision to migrate, because there can be like kind of two primary strategies. There's many, but these are like the two most popular ones. So you could migrate CI first, like a CI builds on the Bazel, and then come back to the local, and then go to the distribution builds. Or you could start with the local and then CI CD. The first, I mean, this of course depends on your needs, but I mean, I could give you like my own reasons. I would pick the first one because the local build integration become a bit of complex because it needs to integrate the Bazel with the Xcode IDE, right? So which can become a bit of complex. So because of that reason, I would pick the first one. Right. Okay. So we are reaching kind of towards the very end of the talk. So let's kind of try to understand like how you can make these two things work together, Xcode and the Bazel build system. So what you need to do is, what we did is we pulled the build system out of Xcode. So you still use the Xcode, everything else except the build system. So how you can do it, because Xcode is a closed source thing, it's a black box. It's not open source, you don't know what's going on. So you have to deal with very limited opportunities you have to stop Xcode from doing the build. So the way to do it, like, so very bit of a hack. So you could override certain build settings. So for example, like you can override the compiler to do nothing. So Xcode still try to pick each source file and try to compile, but we override, instead of trying to compiling the source file, we override it to do nothing. Why we ask it to do nothing? Because we already do it in Bazel. And then after that, we actually get all the output that Bazel produce. Actually, all the output that Xcode expects to be there once these actions are performed, and then we copy them back to the Bazel, and then Xcode satisfied and it continue. So this is kind of like a very brief overview of like how this integration happened, but I will later kind of have some reference set of links that you can refer to more details, like how to do it, including some details blog post. So this is very interesting project, like if you're going in this part. So in our case, we built something on our own to make the Bazel builds files the source of truth. So what I mean by that is like we don't commit Xcode project files to the Git repo today. So we only have the Bazel build description. We generate the Xcode project based on them, like on the fly, and everyone generates their own. So we don't face these conflicts much because of that. But the thing is, like, this is, I mean, if we are going to do it today, I would pick this project instead, because this was not supporting all our requirement at the time. This was open source like when we did this, but now it is very feature rich. So I would recommend to use this one, like if anyone wants to do it today. Okay, so what it does is like it lets you describe your entire project using something like this, and then generate Xcode projects, and then you can like do its business as usual. Okay, so the way it happens is you have the build description file from the Bazel. These are called the build files. And then rules Xcode proj, this is the tool that I mentioned. It actually converts them to Xcode proj, and then you have all you need. You can build them. Right, okay, finally, back to the question, do you need an alternative build system to Xcode build system? So we went through like first, we try to define the problems, and then we try to evaluate high-level available solutions. So now, like if you had to make a decision, I think like it totally depends on your own situation. So recommendation is to like don't do it, never do it because someone else, like a big company does it. It's almost always, it depends on your requirements, your own situation, your own scale. Evaluate that, your own problems, and go ahead with like whatever that you feel kind of confident about, right? So and it depends on the problem. So this is the summary of the answer that what we had talked about. Like answer depends on the problems, and how alternative fits and solutions to your needs. These are links, set of links that might help you. One of links is like, if you kind of happy to connect with me, like I'm happy to connect. And then all others are like some tutorials and some interesting repositories related to this talk. That's the end of it. Let's move into questions, if any.
Can you put up that last slide?
Yeah, sure.
Fast.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, this will be published as well, but here it goes.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
Do you need dedicated people to manage Bazel?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, at this point, my feeling is you still need. It might not be dedicated, but maybe like some capacity dedicated to it, like 50%, something like that. But when we do it, I think we needed like a much larger effort because the ecosystem wasn't very well evolved. But at this point of time, considering where things are, migration will still take a lot of efforts because there is a learning curve there. You need a dedicated team to kind of do the migration. But after that, maintain can be less of a burden at the moment because of the ecosystem, how the ecosystem has evolved. And one highlight is like, if you have like 100% Swift project, things are much easier than a mixed language project. It's still possible, but there are some catches that you might need to figure out.
Do you have millions of lines of code and grep? Really?
Yeah, so
Millions of lines of code.
yeah, so this is, I'm not talking about the entire code base, but our passenger application, for example, which is a super app, which has a lot of features. I have some colleagues here, they might agree with me. So it crosses more than 2 million, I think crossing 3 million. So I'm talking about the entire repository, including the test, right? So if you talk about the source code only, still cross 1 million, I think. But entire thing close to 3 million now. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Where do you store the case build?
The build cache. Yeah, so the build caches you can, so there are some tools that you can use to get the build cache, but ultimately you can pick whatever this, but for example, like we could use S3, AWS S3, and then you expose it through an URL, and then like this becomes something like a very simple REST API. You send the hash. So the way it works is like any action, what Bazel first does, if you enable the cache, what it does is, okay, this is all the inputs to this action, and then calculate the hash, and then check if this action has performed before using the hash, and then if it is available, it downloads it. It doesn't do the action locally. So this, and then like there are open source tools that let you kind of have this simple web service, accept the hash, check the S3 bucket, if it finds in the S3 bucket, and then return it. Otherwise, say kind of return it is not available. But storage can be anything, but it could be S3, or it could be like, let's say it could be even simpler disk storage that you can attach to your server. Yeah, it can be anything like that.
So the hash here is based on the commit on the local user?
No, hash is like primarily the input. Like for example, let's say, because these actions are very granular. Like, so let's say that even like compiling a one single source file can be a one action. So if that's the action, so let me like list down a couple of inputs. So one is the source file, of course, which is the content of the source file. And then it could be the compiler version, which matters, right? So the compiler version is another input, right? And then maybe you might have the compiler flags, debug, release, whatever. So all these becomes inputs. Anything that could impact the output becomes the input, and then you hash. Bazel handles this automatically. You don't have to worry about this, but it hash this all the inputs, and that becomes how you access this storage. Yeah.
Is there any other issue when, let's say, you use like either Swift Package Manager or CocoaPods or?
Yeah, so I think that the dependency management part becomes a bit tricky. Like, so if it's Swift Package Manager, there are easy paths to this because there are some open source tools that could convert Swift Package Manifest into a Bazel build description automatically. So you can have the Swift Package Manager manifest defined, and then this tool let you convert them. And then like you could simply use Swift packages as Bazel targets. So when it comes to CocoaPods, yes, there are tools, but they're a bit of outdated now because the CocoaPods went into the maintenance mode recently, I think a few months ago. Yeah, so the CocoaPods kind of, they're not actively maintaining it anymore, but they're still doing some patches. So with that also, like the Bazel tools around CocoaPods is also moving in very slow speed. So I think like if you have CocoaPods still, yes, you can do it, but I think that should be your first evaluation, whether existing tool works for you or not. But if you have Swift Package Manager based setup, then it's kind of a bit obvious. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
More from a practical perspective. So, in your experience, how big is the repository before you start thinking about this problem?
Yeah, let me tell you our story, right? So we actually had this problem of Xcode playing the beach balls. You remember, like, so there is this loading spinner and then Xcode, even when you open, it's wait long time. So I think we had this problem around kind of 1.5 million lines of code, but this was when the Intel Max was the norm. But when we switched to Apple Silicon, it's a different story. I think that with the Apple Silicon, you have a bit of more leeway. I think it could handle 2 millions, probably kind of not very much struggle. But I think like it might still hit these problems around 2 million, 2.5 million. Yeah, so what Apple Silicon did is like, so it gave us bit of like a more room to survive. Yeah, but I think today's world, if you're on Apple Silicon, yeah, I think probably like around 2.5 million lines of code, you might face these problems. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure.
How do you manage 250 Mac Mini?
It is something like, I mean, we are writing a blog post about this, like expect something coming soon. So it used to be a vendor before, like a third-party vendor, but we had our own custom setup. But now we manage it our own. So it's like we have a data center in Malaysia, and then we have a team there. I mean, not dedicated to this, but we have like a infrastructure team there. So they set up this, and then but the good thing is, like this kind of setup, like usually if you build good enough redundancy, so once it's working, you don't have to worry much because it doesn't break easily for a bit of long time. And also like we have a bit of kind of setup to kind of, if something goes wrong, there is this like a set of tools around Apple Business Manager that you could manage this machine remotely, even the OS updates, anything, except that you need to kind of like reset the machine. But now we have a setup like it's quite interesting. Like you could purchase a machine through the Apple Business Manager. You plug the network cables and the power, it starts taking jobs, because configuration is automatic. So yeah, which is quite interesting setup. But yeah, I expect to write a blog post probably in a month or two. Yeah. Okay, I guess that's it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the question.